Hello and welcome, this is Sugi and today I'm gonna do something a bit more different from the usual videos, and this is some sort of a research video going into the history of the MOBA games and the history of the terminology of the word MOBA, Action RTS and AOS. Before we can talk about the games of today, whatever it's League of Legends, Smite, Dota, Heroes of the Storm or Vainglory, we have to go back into our ancient past first and see the origins of this genre in order to understand it first. And this takes back into our ancient forefathers, the strategy games. And the strategy games is a really big genre. It includes a lot of different games such as board games that were converted into PC, such as the poker, chess, etc. A lot of 4X type of games such as Master of Orion, Sid Meier's Civilization, and artillery games such as Scorch and etc. Fast forwarding to 1989, a game called Herzog Zwei came out. And this is regarded as the first true RTS game, standing for Real-Time Strategy. Of course, Doom 2 came on 82, but a lot of people do not consider it as a true RTS game due to its limitations and other reasons. And of course, the RTS genre, blossomed into other titles such as Total Annihilation, Blizzard Warcraft and Starcraft series, Age of Empires, and etc. Going back into Herzog Zwei, which actually is very similar to today's game called Air Mech. And the basic idea of Herzog Zwei is probably the most closest to today's MOBA, because it included an idea where you played as a character which could turn into a human and to a plane. You move into different paces where you picked up different units and tanks and you positioned them in somewhere in the map, and they automatically move into the enemy base and try to destroy it. It's in loose terms very similar into the term MOBA we have today. And this of course spans into our next segment where we have the first iterations of the MOBA games. So the next evolutionary step that would happen on this genre would actually take place in '98 when a game called Future Cop L.A.P.D. would be released for PS1 and PC. And it had this very popular game mode called Precinct Assault. And this is, funnily enough, actually the very first action RTS / MOBA ever made. It wasn't the Warcraft, Dota, or AOS and Starcraft. This was the very first one. This is the actual original shit. So let's recap some of the similarities between the games. So first of all, you have a symmetrical map. You control this character from a third-person view, which has different type of abilities, such as transforming from a car into this walking mech. You have minigun ability, you have two different types of rockets that you can use. You're able to also collect power-ups and objectives around the map. So if you die, you respawn from base, such as in every game pretty much in this genre. You're also able to use these points to summon planes and tanks to attack the enemy base. And these are AI controlled. So essentially it has this sort of a wave system similar to Enfo. So you pretty much use the points to summon stuff. And you also have a lot of turrets around the map which you need to destroy and you can also capture, and among other things. And it is very, primitive in type of sense because it doesn't have items, of course, but you have the abilities, you have the hero type of a view, you have objectives that you control around the map, and you have the PvP element there too. So essentially, this was the very first thing. This is the very first in the genre. And later on, it would evolve to different type of things, of course. On the very same year when Future Cop L.A.P.D. came out, another more popular title came out as well, and this is of course StarCraft 1. And StarCraft 1 had this feature called the map editor, which allowed people to create their own maps, mods essentially, and play them online with friends and strangers, or offline, whatever they wanted to do. And one of these maps that was eventually created was called AOS, standing for Aeon on Strife, and there was a lot of different variations made out of this. But the key same features existed, where there was a 3-lane map, 2 bases, and there was AI creeps pushing down the middle, the bottom, and the top into the enemy base, and those who destroy the base essentially won. And this like map style was pretty much adapted to Dota and to League of Legends and to Smite and other types of games in this genre, and this became pretty much a norm in the setting. While it wasn't as complex as games like Dota, essentially the characters didn't have abilities, the heroes you chose, you could only like upgrade the armor and the attack damage essentially, and it was pretty much more about microing. Of course, there has been many different variations of the game, and to my understanding it was 3v3 instead of 5v5. And then we move into the Warcraft 3 era where Dota was born, but due to a common misconception, Dota wasn't actually the very first this type of a map inside Warcraft 3. There was different, first of all, there was very many different variations of Dota before it came to be Dota All-Stars. It had different types of developers behind it, or the map makers behind it, and changed hands many times. And there was a map called AOSGT as well, and this map was actually popular before Dota became popular, and people was playing this. And the Warcraft 3 AOS mode was really different from the Dota because it had actually 3 sides. So it was a triangular map, 3 bases on each side of each corner, and I believe it was 3 versus 3 versus 3. I think that was the model in that game, and it was a very interesting type of a setting, and it had items, but it didn't have the Dota's recipe system, which they pretty much implemented. But there was many type of maps which were kind of taking effect from AOSGT and their setting, and Dota wasn't the first one. So it's very important to understand that Dota, yes, it became the most popular, but it wasn't the first mod in Warcraft 3 who replicated this model. And this of course follows into our next chapter in this story. Year after Warcraft 3's release comes one and only expansion pack known as the Frozen Throne, and the Frozen Throne had a lot of restrictions removed out of map editor, which allowed people to make better maps essentially. And years after time, you know, Dota goes different iterations and finally becomes its final form known as Dota All-Stars, which will at some point, I think in 2004 to 2006 period, becomes the most popular custom game in Warcraft 3, and eventually becoming more bigger than the ladder itself in terms of like player base. And this of course leads into people seeing that, oh, this mod is very, very popular, so some developers decide that we're gonna make a standalone game out of this, and this ends up studios like S2 Games making Heroes of Newerth, then Riot Games making League of Legends, and one of the very first MOBA that came out was actually called Demigod, and this was a game studio known as Gas Bowered Games. They released it for Microsoft Windows. They even had a retail copies out of it, and they also sold it on Steam. But the problem and the mistake that they did was that they decided to put a price tag on it instead of being free to play, which eventually killed a lot of MOBA games that decided to go this route, one of them being Guardians of Middle-earth and etc. Awesomenauts did pull it off, but they could be much better if they would be free to play. And then you of course had Heroes of Newerth, had a price tag on it, but they decided to go free to play because they felt that they couldn't compete with League and Dota if they were free to play and all that. And the rest is pretty much history, you know. MOBAs have been adapted to tablets, phones, consoles. There's been different variations like 3D. Now we have games like, you know, Battlerite, and even though these are not like pure MOBAs, like every definition in the dictionary, like you can look up the word gay, it had a different meaning back in, it didn't mean homosexuals back in the day. I think this goes back in the 30s or 40s. It just meant like a person who was very, very happy, and, you know, I would say, you can read the descriptions yourself. But what I'm saying, every term will go through evolution. So what MOBA meant maybe 3 years ago will have a different definition what it will mean 3 years from now or now. So this ends up this segment of this video. Now that we have finally gone through the history section, we can finally go into the part that has been pissing me off for years, and that is the terminology that we have been debating over a decade, by the way, for what we should use this, what name we should use on this genre, whatever it's action RTS, AOS, hero brawler, Dota style game, as our beloved TB likes to say it, and then we have Moba. And I will be ending this debate now in this video, okay? So the first one I want to talk about is the term action RTS and how flawed is the term really in the reality. So let's take an example with another gaming genres we have. For example, we have FPS, first person shooter. That means that the camera will be in first person, and it also will mean that there will be a shooting game, so you will be using a gun or bow or maybe a throwing axe or throwing daggers. That is the definition you would get from that, genre term, okay? If it would be a third person shooter, it would be a third person view with a gun or projectile or bow, as in the FPS. And then you have team shooter. That means essentially some type of a shooting mechanic again, with an element where there will be a team playing with you or against you, I guess. And those terms always tell you something, right? And you can see what are the differences between the three, right? And then you have a term like strategy games, okay? And then you have the term real-time strategy. And the difference between these two is simple. The real-time strategy means non-turn-based game. So, for example, Fire Emblem is a strategy game. Civilization is a strategy game. Chess is a strategy game. Warcraft 3, Age of Empires are real-time strategy because they're not turn-based, okay? And it's really easy to tell the difference. But when I'm going to pitch you the idea of what is the difference between a real-time strategy and an action real-time strategy, I can't come up with anything because it's such a loose term. Okay, you see, you think about it, the word action can mean literally anything. You could say Madden is an action real-time strategy, the action RTS. Because it does have an element of strategy in it. You play different units and there's an action on it, right? But as I said, it's a very loose term. But when you look at the term MOBA, it tells you it's a multiplayer, which means there's going to be more than one player. And by the way, Action RTS doesn't tell you that. It can mean there's only one player. And definitely, I don't think I would be calling that an RTS. And I wouldn't call a game a MOBA which has only one player, right? So, and then it means online. It means it's online. I don't know any Action RTS game that is offline, by the way. And then there's a battle, means there's going to be fighting, and then there's going to arena, which means one set of map, which is usually small because arenas are not like city large, okay? So you couldn't say that Battlefield is an arena game because it's a really, really large maps, okay? So you see, the Action RTS term, in terms of its like real definition, is very loose. It doesn't have like a thing that narrows it down to something. It can be literally anything. Hence, it will be very confusing because when somebody says this is an action RTS game, it can literally mean anything, any game that has strategy on it, right, guys? And arts doesn't sound very good because it can. Oh, you're into arts? What kind of paintings you like? So there's a double meaning to that, and it can be very misleading, right? But sometimes people use action RTS, then it makes sense. But if people use arts, it's been misleading, to be honest. And then we have Total Biscuit, famously using the words. I really get triggered every time he says on these MOBA reviews, he says, a Dota-style game. And he's putting that emphasis in the name because Dota was allegedly the first game, but in this video, as we saw, it is Future Cop L.A.P.D. So he would have to say... Future Cop L.A.P.D. style game. That sounds very dumb, and you can't really contribute to the Dota because Dota wasn't the first game. So the term is really, really bad. It just can't say over style game, Call of Duty like style game. You have better names that you can come up with. Let's just go with it. The MOBA in the end is pretty good one. I know that people don't like Riot. I don't like Riot. They came up with a name, but it makes a lot of sense because it narrows down what the game can be in terms of the actual definition. Then you look at Hero Brawler, okay? Hero Brawler, that could make sense. That's not really a bad name, but it doesn't necessarily mean there's levels involved. Hero Brawler could be probably Smash Bros. That's what it means. It includes a hero and it includes a fight, okay? That's two definitions that it only contains, right? Brawler can mean many things. Fighting is one of them. I think noisy quarrel, squabble are also listed on the definitions in dictionary.com. And then we have AOS, Aeon and Strife. It doesn't really mean anything, right? People don't know what it is if they're not being told what it is, right? So it's not a really bad term, but it would always, I think, all AOS always would have to mean 3 lanes, because that's what kind of the original AOS is based on. So if you had a game such as Dawngate that had 2 lanes, then that wouldn't be an AOS game, right? So you couldn't really use that term either. And that kind of gives, I know Dota people don't like the word MOBA, but that's what the fucking game is. Your action RTS, somebody can come up with a debate, hopefully they can, otherwise they look like fucking clowns. Not that you don't already are. Hey. But yeah, I'm gonna wrap this video up here. I made my case about this term. Let's just go with it, because everybody else is using except 3 games, that being Dota, Heroes of New Earth. And the funny thing with Heroes of New Earth, because they call it a Dota game, yet they have another, S2 Games have another game called Strife, yet they use MOBA with that game. So they are kind of inconsistent, either it's 1 or 2. You can't have an action RTS and a MOBA game which are the same. That doesn't make any sense. So you would have to have like a defining situation that, no, the defining difference between these two is in one you can deny or something like that, which are not narrowed down, which nobody has said before. And then you have Air Mech. But we established that Herzog Zwei, which is exactly the same game, okay, Armech has a progression system, but essentially they're the same game, hence it should be just a real-time strategy game, not an action RTS. So hopefully this was a bit of a revelation, at least this last part of this video, because I'm really tired of hearing people come up with new terms and trying to be original. Let's just go with the MOBA term, because it's most sensical, and people don't have to think about like what's the difference between the two. It's like, because there's no fucking difference, right? So I'm gonna wrap that up here. Thanks for watching. Fucking subscribe, guys. And yeah, stop using the fucking clone words all the time in this channel. It's fucking tiring. I'm getting cancer from that. Okay, cheers.